hi. Rouen, the historical capital of Normandy, nowadays the center of the region Normandy and the prefecture of department Seaside Seine in the north of France. Geography and development of the city. Initially this city was located only on the right coast of Seine. Now the city line included Le Vaubereny district Seine North and also the island of Lacroix. Landscape of a northern part of the city very hilly. This part dominates over the flat plateau where there is a part of settlements of the Rouen city agglomeration. Within the city the Seine River occupies the space of 179 hectares. The territory of the city is penetrated by inflows of Seine, in particular, of the Obic, Robic and Cailloux River. In Rouen there are over 300 hectares of landscape gardening territories, 210 km of transport ways among which 16 km of bicycle paths and 8 km of pedestrian streets. The street of Duc Gros Horlage became the first pedestrian street in France. 1971. The seaport of Rouen became one of the leading ports of France on the volume of import of citrus and tropical fruit. In the second half of the 19th century the volume of port activity sharply increased as owing to death of the French vineyards because of phylloxera epidemic products of winemaking had to be imported into the country from Algeria. Names of the famous shipowners whose names are given to streets and avenues of city agglomeration are entered in the history of the port of Rouen. Before construction of the sea harbour in Le Havre the port of Rouen accepted sea vessels and, up to the beginning of the 1960th years, port activity was carried out in the downtown as vessels were moored directly at Joan of Arc Bridge, opposite to former bus station. In Rouen there are 62000 units of housing from which 54000 are places of full-time residence. The volume of social housing is about 20%. For maintenance of the message between two coasts of Seine in Rouen 6 bridges, one of which, Gustave Flaubert Bridge, till this day is the biggest drawbridge in Europe. 86 meters. Work. The Church of Abbey Saint-Wendier city administration is a terminal point of a route on abbeys of the Valley of Seine. Fontenelle-Ski Abbey, Abbey of Zumies, St. George's Abbey in Boscherville. In Rouen sea climate with a large amount of rainfall. 131 days in a year with rainfall more than 1. Winters here soft, the summer heat is tolerant because of influence of English Channel. History. The ancient settlement of Rottemagus. On the place of modern Rouen appeared at the end of the era of independence of Celts or already during the Gallo-Roman era, and it was the center of nation of Viliocas, the Celtic people whose lands probably lay in the valley of Seine from modern Codic up to Pontoise. The city settlement appeared on the right coast of Seine in the period of government of the Emperor Octavian Augustus, and became the second largest city of Gallia after Lugdun. The time of blossoming of this Gallo-Roman city fell on the 3rd century. It is known that at this time in the city the amphitheatre and big terms constructed. Since the middle of the 4th century attacks of nations of Germans began. During this period in the city constructed the first cathedral and the first diocesan of Rouen was called. One of the first Rouen diocesans, Victrici, in the work De Laude Domini. 396. Mentions construction of a basilica for storage of the hallows received from Ambrose of Milan. Possibly, it was the church of Saint Etienne which was under construction time during this period. Since 841 year Normans who in the same 841 year plundered Rouen often visited the valley of Seine. In the Fontenelle's Chronicle it is shortly reported. In the year 841 were come by Nordmanna with the leader Oscar and on May 14 burned the city of Rouen. Normans attacked Rouen again in 843. The city became the capital of the Duchy of Normandy after in 911 the leader of Vikings Roland under the terms of St. Clairserectskogo of the contract received from the King Karl Prostavati in the possession the territory corresponding to the modern region of Normandy. On concepts of Carlovingians Roland received the status de column Rouen, but in texts of that era it is often titled as Princeps. In 949 the Duke of Normandy Richard I nicknamed Fearless, during a siege of Rouen battled against the joint troops of the King of France Louis IV, the Emperor of Germans Otto Wallenstein and the Column of Flanders. The victory of the Duke received crucial importance for the future of Normandy. What the commemorative plaque placed in the memory of this bloody slaughter into one of buildings the square by Place de la Rue in Rouen remains presently of. Already since an era of Normans Rouen became the seaport trading with the big Parisian region. Here too there was a market of slaves. And undetected celebrated by destruction of the Rouen Jews making the largest community in France to the north from Rouen because of their negative attitude towards the idea of the First Crusade proclaimed the Pope Urban II at the end of 1095. Dukes of Normandy as the residents in most cases preferred Rouen, except for William the Conqueror who elected the capital Caen where he was buried also further. However, heart of one of his descendants, the King of the Lion Heart was buried in the effigy located in an ambulatory of the Rouen Cathedral. In 1150 Rouen received the municipal diploma. Advice of 100 peers ran the city, and inhabitants united in professional corporations and in brotherhoods of masters. Rouen during that era was the largest shopping centre selling salt and fish to Paris and wine to England. In 1200 Rouen was devastated by major fire. The cathedral church needed to be built up anew that took several next centuries. The King of France Philip II Augustus occupied Rouen on June 24, 1204 after a 40-day siege. The captain and the commandant of Rouen Pierre de Prieux signed the act of capitulation of the city, having learned that the help from the Anglo-Norman monarch earned income. In 1204 all Normandy was annexed to lands of the King of France. The French king confirmed the rights and the privileges of Rouen, however the Loch of Dukes ordered to destroy and to construct the Rouen castle for maintenance of control over the city. The Loch was built on the place of an ancient Gallo-Roman amphitheatre and gave it the name, Château Bouvreuil. This Rouen castle was destroyed in the 15th century, using it as a stone quarry, and presently from it remained only well known, called Joan of Arc's Tower, restored with the assistance of the architect Viollet-le-Duc. Despite the name, the tower was in jail of Joan of Arc in 1431. From a tower where the Orleans Virgin really contained, only the Soco base which can be seen remained presently, having passed to the courtyard of House 102 down the street of Rue Jeanne d'Arc. Textile manufactories were widely adopted in Rouen and its vicinities. Elbeuf, Darnetal, Baranton, Willekel, Saint-Pierre-d'Evere-Anisville, Maram, La Ulme, Malone, Monval. Merchants bought wool in England and sold ready cloth at sparkling fairs. Economic prosperity of Rouen was based mainly on river trade across Seine. The Rouen dealers since the time of the King Henry II owned monopoly for navigation across Seine upstream, up to Paris. To England they transported wine and wheat, and back brought wool and tin. Discontent, caused by high taxes, in 1281 developed in Rouen into Massachusetts riots during which killed the mayor and plundered houses of rich citizens. In an instability situation, the King Philip IV liquidated municipality of Rouen and cancelled monopoly of local merchants for trade across Seine. However, residents of Rouen in 1294 redeemed the privileges back. In July 1348, the plague pandemic, Black Death, came to Rouen. In 1382 in the city there was a revolt garel which is ruthlessly stifled by royal troops. After that the authorities lifted taxes and cancelled the privilege of Rouennais on trade across Seine. During an era of Centenary War on January 19, 1419, Rouen was occupied by troops of the English King Henry V, who annexed Normandy to lands of the English crown. Henry V died in 1422, and the King of France Charles VI the same year died. Henry V's brother, John Lancasterski, became the Cantor of France and tried to catch the Rouen lands, but succeeded partially in. Having become the canon of the Rouen Cathedral, he in it is interred, having died in 1435. In Rouen, the former centre of the English power in the territory of the French kingdom, judged by instigation of the Duke of Bedford and party of Bourguignon, and executed Joan of Arc. On May 30, 1431 it was sent to a fire by the Rouen executioner Geoffroy. The same year young Henry VI from a dynasty Lancaster of was crowned in Paris by the King of France and England. Then it arrived in Rouen, where it is noisy the national cry greeted. The King of France returned Rouen to the French crown in 1449, 18 years later after Joan of Arc's death and after 30 years occupation by British. Rouen ministered the religious centre of northern France, wherefore only in these regions possessed own archbishop. In the middle of Centenary War in 1419, after a long siege, British seized Rouen. Since December 25, 1430, in one of towers of the Rouen castle Joan of Arc was in prison. Contrary to a widespread legend, it was contained not in the donjon which nowadays carries the name Tower Joan of Arc, and it is open for tourists, and in the Tower of Tour de la Pucelle which was nearby. The commemorative plaque located on House 102 facade down the street Rue Jean d'Arc, in which yard the so-called base of this tower remained, bears to it. On May 30, 1431 the French national heroine was burned at Storornoknia Square of Rouen. On one of walls of the Bishopric Palace in the city the memorial plate about full rehabilitation of the heroine which happened in quarter of the century after her death is established. At Storornoknia Square of Rouen after World War II the Cathedral Saint of Joan of Arc was built. It is the big modern architectural complex including, except cathedral, also covered market, which gave the name to the area. The roof of cathedral reminds a fire on which in this place Joan of Arc was executed. The place of a fire it is given high memorial up as a bad job. One of walls of new church is made of the remained ancient stained glass windows of the cathedral standing on this place and destroyed by aircraft of allies during disembarkation in Normandy. The buildings stopped by Centenary War were resumed in Rouen with a new force. So, begun during the English occupation, St. Maclou's Church was complete in Renaissance. At last the nave of Church of Abbey Saint Ouen was completed, being left for the present without facade flanked by two towers. The whole of a judicial lobby at the Palace of Justice is built. All new constructions were carried out in style of the burning Gothic style to whom, since 16th century, began to add the first decorative elements inherent in style of the Renaissance. During this period of history, Rouen took the fourth place in the kingdom on population, conceding to Paris, Marseille and Lyon. Rouen was one of the Norman centres of art of the Renaissance, in particular thanks to support of archbishops Georges Ambias and his nephew Georges II Ambias, and also financiers, architects and artists, for example Roland Leroux, decorated palaces and mansions with a decor in the Italian motifs. A striking example of such decor is the Financial Bureau. Bureau des Finances, located opposite to gate of a cathedral church. Work on a door cloth of Church of Saint Maclou is attributed to the famous sculptor Jean Goujon. In November 1468, Louis XI, for the purpose of expansion of the city, the royal diploma prolonged the term of the Rouen fairs up to 6 days. The main contribution to economic well-being of Rouen of the end of the 15th century was made by cloth workshops and also silk weaving studio and metallurgy. Fishers of Rouen reached coast of Newfoundland, being engaged in trade of a cod, and also came into the Baltic Sea for catching of a herring. Salt arrived from Portugal and the Atlantic gerund. Fabrics sold to Spain, from where they at the time brought wool, and Medici's family made the center of trade in the Italian Allumicelievi alum of Rouen. At the beginning of the 16th century, through Rouen began to perform the main volume of the French trade operations with Brazil, buying their mainly dyes for fabrics. Thanks to it, in workshops of Rouen used the dyes directly delivered from the New World, received red dye from the Brazilian tree, blue from an indigo plant. Such tinctorial specialization of the city was confirmed by presence of Florentines who chose Rouen as the center of trade in the Italian mineral alum in the north of France. Alum was necessary for fixing of dye on fabric. Development and extraction of alum at all times, from the Middle Ages till modern times, was only in monopoly of the Apostolic See. October 1, 1550, at the request of the King Henry II in Rouen, arranged the Nave Mackay, which showed that dynamic Norman ports are worthy to become a starting point of development of the South American colonies of the French kingdom. In 1500, 16 years later after start in Rouen of the first printing house, in the city 10 printing houses already worked. Since 1530 years, a part of the population of Rouen joined the movement of the Reformation and became Protestants according to the doctrine preached by John Calvin. The number of reformat made from a quarter to a third of citizens of Rouen, and they were in position of minority. In the 1560th years in Rouen, disagreements between the Roman Catholic and Protestant communities escalated. The slaughter in Vaucey laid the foundation of the first of a series of the religious wars in France. On April 15, 1562, Protestants entered a town hall of Rouen and banished Bal. In May, suburbs were captured by universal fight against icons. On May 10, Rouen was left parliamentarians by Roman Catholics. Roman Catholics occupied a Fort St. Catherine dominating over the city. Both camps resorted to means of terror. The authorities of Rouen asked for the help of the Queen of England, which according to provisions of the contract signed on September 20, 1562 in Hampton Court with Prince Con, directed troops for support of Protestants. So British occupied Le Havre. On October 26, 1562 the French royal troops plundering the city within 3 days entered Rouen. News of the massacre of St. Bartholomew came to Rouen at the end of August 1572. Trying to avoid Massachusetts' slaughter of Protestants, the city authorities detained them. However, from September 17 to September 20 the national crowd broke prison doors and dealt shortly with Protestants. Then Rouen was repeatedly besieged by Henry IV, but the city resisted, in particular during a siege from December 1591 to May 1592. Rouen was come to the rescue by the Spanish army under command of the Duke Parma. Constantly sitting chamber of a chessboard of Normandy formed in 1499 in Rouen by Georges d'Amboise in 1515 was transformed by the King Francis I to Parliament. This parliament remained authority in the province up to the French Revolution. The parliament possessed judicial, legislative and executive power in the questions relating to Normandy, and its powers exceeded authority of royal advice. The parliament also had powers on management of the French Canada. In the 16th-18th centuries the well-being of the city was provided by trade in textiles and port activity. In 1703 the Chamber of Commerce of Normandy was formed. Rouen had no own university. In 1734 in the city opened the surgical school, the second in France after Parisian. 1724. In 1758 in the west of Rouen opened new city hospital which succeeded the former hospital which was to the south of Cathedral, became too small. Stendhal. 1783-1842. Spoke of Rouen as about an abomination hole, it is even worse than Grenoble, where he was born. It's the complete antithesis to what we consider big, he wrote. During War of 1870 Rouen was occupied Prussian troops which were billeted in the city since January 9, 1871. In 1896 Rouen received the French National and Colonial Exhibition. Village Neger. Black Village. Built on the Field of Mars became one of its main attractions. The different worlds of the distant countries united around its small lake where pies from whole trees and where all day a great number of pickaninnies dived in search of the coins drawn by visitors floated, wrote the almanac of an exhibition. The public and the press were fascinated by this primitive society. The exhibition was attended by guests. In the years of World War I in Rouen the British military base was located. During World War II, despite heroic defense, Rouen was occupied by the German troops from June 9, 1940 to August 30, 1944. During defense in June 1940 in Rouen there was a heavy fire which destroyed all historical quarter between a cathedral church and Seine. The city sustained other large damage during bombings of Normandy by Allies from 1942 to 1944 when bridges through Seine and Switch charred in Sotteville around were the purposes. Two raids which entailed most of all victims happened on April 19, 1944 when 816 citizens died from airstrikes of the British Air Force and 2,000 Rouennais were wounded. Also during these air raids the Rouen Cathedral and the Palace of Justice was significantly damaged. Later, from May 30 to June 5, 1944, Rouen was bombed by Americans, and this week became history as Red Week. From this bombing in Rouen, the cathedral church and the historical quarter adjoining to it burned again. After war, the downtown was restored and reconstructed for 15 years according to the project of the French architect Jacques Grebe. Economy. In Rouen, the large river port available to sea vessels is located. Transfer of freights from sea vessels on river and on the railroads. In the city gained development cotton and other branches of the textile industry. In suburbs, metallurgy, mechanical engineering, oil processing, chemical, woodworking and paper industry. In the Rouen city agglomeration there are 176,300 jobs, from which 75700 it is the share of Rouen. In the city about 1,300 trade enterprises function and the wholesale market of agricultural products of national value. Min. Works. Structure of employment of the population. Agriculture minus 0.2%. The industry minus 5.1%. Construction minus 4.8%. Trade, transport and services sector minus 48.0%. The public and municipal services minus 41.9%. Unemployment rate 2017 minus 18.1%. France in general minus 13.4%, Department Seaside Seine minus 15.3%. Average annual income on one person, Euro 2018 minus 20340. France in general minus 21730, Department Seaside Seine minus 21140. Sites. The Ministry of Culture of France ranked Rouen as the list of the cities of arts and history. The French writer Stendhal called Rouen Athens of Gothic style. Though various civil and religious constructions of Rouen significantly suffered during bombings and the fires in the years of World War II, fortunately, the most part of the most signed historical city monuments was reconstructed or built anew thanks to what Rouen is in the first 6 of the French cities by quantity of the classified historical monuments, and in the 5, on antiquity of the historical legacy. Primatial Cathedral Church Notre Dame collected in itself lines of all stages of development of a Norman Gothic style. Over a crossing of Cathedral, the tower lamp climaxed by a pig iron spike 151-meter high towers. The highest in France. The tower never performed function of a campanile. In church it is possible to get acquainted with history of stained glass windows, since 13th century up to now. Besides stained glass windows, the cathedral is famous for the front sculptures. 70 statues placed at the height from 20 to 30 meters executed during the period between 1362 and 1421. At the top level of sculptural group statues of angels and saint maidens, below whom apostles, under whom, in the third row, statues of archbishops are presented or located or presented. Only in the left part of a facade. In course are located two buried tombs of the first dukes of Normandy, including the first Duke Rollin and the King of the Lion Heart, who bequeathed the heart in this cathedral, in memory of love to Normandy. The tower seam remains 77 meters high, borders a facade from the north. It is called by name the Archbishop of Rouen, living in the 7th century, and which on a legend defeated the gargoyle residing on swamps at Seine. The tower began to be built in the 12th century, and its first levels are executed in style of an early Gothic style, whereas the last level and the roof crowning them are executed in style of the burning Gothic style. This tower burned out in 1944. The old tower, 80 meters high, borders the main facade from the south. Constructed on the offerings collected during Quadragesimas, the tower is a perfect example of style of the burning Gothic style. The cathedral church is immortalized in a cycle from 30 cloths, the Rouen Cathedral of the Impressionist Claude Monet. Also, the cathedral is obliged by the popularity to the novel by Gustave Flaubert, Madame Bovary. The conventual church of Abbey Saint-Ouen is executed in styles of the mature and burning Gothic style. The ancient Abbey Saint-Ouen was considered as one of the most powerful Benedictine monasteries of all Normandy. The works on a construction of conventual church begun in 1318 were suspended for the period of Centenary War and completed only in the 16th century. The church is length about 137 meters from an apse to an entrance to a nave, and its arches rise by height of 33 meters. Gothic stained glass windows of the 14th century on a mammon and a variety haven't equal in France. In church there is a big body of work of famous Aristide Cavaillé, to which Charles Marie Vidot devoted one of the concordances. The crossing tower over Church of Abbey, nicknamed the Crown of Normandy, has height of 87 meters. In 1800, in the former dormitory of friars, the municipality of Rouen was placed. Thus the city administration until our days is near Church of Abbey, having brought the building into accord to modern requirements. Sign city monument is the big city clock. Gross horloge, symbolizing power of Rouen. The mechanism of this tower astronomical clock is dated the 14th century, and the dial is executed in the 16th century. Also determined in a residence under which Renaissance arch the street of Rue du Gros Horloge lies, and sideways it is adjoined by a Gothic tower. On the double dial the only error specifies hour. In the top oval window hours show day of the week and lunar phases. The paschal lamb on a stamp board at top of an arch symbolizes long traditions of textile matter in Rouen. The tower and hours were completely restored. Works lasted from 1997 to December 2006. The building of Financial Bureau, built in 1509-1540 according to instructions of the Cardinal Georges d'Amboise, is the oldest monument of Renaissance which remained presently in Rouen. Fortunately, the building practically didn't suffer from bombings in the years of World War II. Since 1959 the Office on Tourism of Rouen is located here. External and internal facades and also a roof of the former Financial Bureau since 1928 are classified as a National Historical Monument. It is known that the Impressionist Claude Monet wrote 11 cloths of the cycle Rouen Cathedral being in this building. The Palace of Justice during a pre-revolutionary era was the residence of Parliament of Normandy. The building of the palace is one of the few examples of civil Gothic architecture of the end of the period of the Middle Ages which remained in France. In Gothic style only the left wing is to observe from a court of honor. Buildings constructed between the end of the 15th century and the beginning of the 16th century is executed. The facade of a wing is decorated with pinnacles, gargoyles and a late Gothic balustrade at the roof basis. The adjoining ladder is reconstructed at the beginning of the 20th century in style of a neo-Gothic style. In the central case, mixture of Gothic style and the Renaissance is observed. This part of the building was built almost all the 16th century. In comparison with a Gothic wing, the decor of the central case is more magnificent, and its balustrade completely another. The right wing of the building is neo-Gothic stylization. It was constructed in the 19th century on the place of a former wing of classical style. The part of the building which is going outside Rue Jean d'Arc together with Clock Tower is executed in style of a neo-Gothic style. In ancient times in this building the chamber of a chessboard of Normandy, which became since the 16th century Parliament of Normandy, was located. In the city a large number of private city mansions of the 16th, 19th centuries which bear to importance of Rouen and its economic well-being remained. In architecture of the private mansion of de Bortred Hotel. Place de la Pucelle, located on the square, joint influence of late Gothic and the Renaissance is noticeable. It was constructed by Signor de Bortred Guillaume Leroux, the advisor of Chamber of a chessboard of Normandy in the first half of the 16th century. Private owners sold it in December 2006, and since 2010 the mansion is converted into magnificent hostel. The majority of remarkable mansions is built of a hewn stone, but some have structural elements from Fachwerke. St. Maclou's Church of St. Malo, constructed between 1437 and 1517 and devoted to the saint, is not enough, is a pearl of late Gothic. The facade of church is decorated with a round window rose. The porch from Five Gate, along this facade, is built on a roundish arch and topped with richly decorated vimperga. Three gate minister for an entrance, and the remaining two are closed by the shutters of a carved tree executed in style of the Renaissance. In respect of church of a sleeve of a cross aisle aren't given outside. The building is executed in Norman tradition, with a tower lamp which here too has function of a campanile. The spike was established in the 19th century. The vestry and east part, which marble columns were ordered in Italy, is imitation style the Neo-Renaissance. The church was damaged in the years of World War II because of hit of 2 air bombs and the subsequent fire. The altar of church is very light as design features allow to get to sunlight, and for this reason of a column of a nave and chorus have no capitals. In the reconstructed chorus is beautiful Baroque wooden panels of pre-war time which survived only in one chapel aren't visible anymore. One of chapels in the southern part of an ambulatory remained not reconstructed. Presently in church there were few ancient stained glass windows, and those which remain are partially made with modern elements. Nevertheless, over a northern gate it is possible to see Icevaux's tree of the 15th century, with the sitting Icy according to tradition of Flanders, and over the southern gate there is a Christ's crucifixion. In the yard of Church of St. Maclou is ancient ossuaria of square shape, formed by 4 kryla of a stone and a fachwerke. Its history goes back to the plague pandemic Black Death of 1348, which claimed the lives of the most part of citizens. The cemetery around St. Maclou's Church became too small, and turned the yard used before as a parvis into a necropolis. The next epidemic which struck Rouen in 1526 caused the necessity of construction of 3 galleries with fachwerkovy walls. The type of these 3 constructions significantly differed from modern. Roofing designs were higher and sloping. On the 2nd floor there were no windows and storage of human remains was ordered there. In the 17th century added the 4th wing, partially similar to 3 former wings, to a complex. It never ministered ossuary, and priests of Ward St. Maclo constructed it under school and housing. After the ban of burials in the downtown in the 18th century and destructions of cemeteries, all complex of constructions was transformed to school. Now here the Regional Art School of Rouen and also security service of a historical legacy is located. During an era of centenary Worcester or Knockney Square, Rouen became the place of an execution of the national heroine of France Joan of Arc, burned on a fire on May 30, 1431. The centre of the area removed the remains of Church of Saint Sauveur, and on its perimeter built fachwerkovy houses. Near the place of a fire the big cross of Joan of Arc is placed into the square. In 1979, on the place of martyrdom of the Orleans Virgin, built the Saint Church of Joan of Arc. Having built this building, the municipality solved 3 problems. In the city there was a church devoted to Joan of Arc. This building also became a civil memorial of the national heroine and also the place of storage of stained glass windows from St. Vincent's Church, destroyed in 1944. The Tower of Joan of Arc is the only survived part of the Rouen castle, constructed in 1204 by the King Philip Augustus on ruins of the Gallo-Roman amphitheatre of an era of the settlement of Rhodomedus. Before, there was a legend that in this tower Joan of Arc was held in custody. There are few remains of the ancient quarter near Seine, destroyed by the fire of 1940 and bombings of 1944. The pedestal, Place de la Haute-Ville, located on the modern square, is constructed in 1524 in style of the Renaissance. Construction has 2 floors and a small loggia with the Corinthian columns, pilasters, pediments and a lantern bell tower. Presumably, Jean Goujon became her architect. The word fête in Old French language means a reliquary, derivative of Latin feretrum, stretcher for the dead, reminding of a ceremony of raising of a shrine with the relics of Saint Romain, a legendary diocesan of Rouen of the 7th century. In reality, on this place there was a final point of the annual solemn course with halos of the promoter of Rouen, Saint Romain. This procession was a part of execution of Saint Romain's privilege, the mention of which ascends by 1210. Annually, canons of the Rouen Cathedral chose one of the criminals sentenced to death who, having got into a building box, had to lift 3 times a shrine with the relics of a sacred diocesan. After this action, canons pardoned the criminal as they had privilege to release on ascension one sentenced to death. This privilege has roots in a legend of the gargoyle living on the marshy coast of Seine and against which, by means of the suicide bomber Saint Romain, won. Such tradition was stopped in 1790. Post of the Mayor of Rouen since 2020 is held by the socialist Nicolas Mayer-Rossignol. On municipal elections of 2020, the left bloc headed by it won a victory in the 2nd round, having received 67.12% of votes. Culture. Botanical Garden of Rouen. Festival of the Scandinavian Cinema. In March from 1988 to 2010. View of World Cinema from Rouen Festival. In January since 1995. Normandy Impressionists Festival. April-September 2013. Armada, a big descent of large sailing vessels and warships. The sixth meeting took place from June 6 to June 16, 2013. Faire Romain, the big feast which is annually arranged on embankments of Seine from October to November. Museums. In Art Museum of Rouen, the collections of pictures, drawings and sculptures complemented with home decoration are presented. The most significant exhibits are Caravaggio, Velázquez, Delacroix, Géricault, Modigliani, Gerard David, Monet and Sisley's cloths. The Natural History Museum of Rouen on the importance of the collections takes in France the second place after the Parisian Natural History Museum. The Rouen Museum is founded in 1828 by the local biologist Félix Archimedes Pouchy. From 1996 to February 23, 2007 the museum was closed for restoration works. In the Archaeological Museum of Rouen, collections of archaeological finds of the Gallo-Roman era and an era of Meroving are presented. The collection of objects of art and stained glass windows of the period of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance is also presented. In the museum, ancient Greek and ancient Egyptian collections are also created. The Museum of History of Medicine of Gustave Flaubert, where the room in which the writer was born is presented, and also the large-scale collection of objects, pharmaceutical ware, surgical instruments, birth certificates, hospital furniture, statues of Saint Hilaire is collected. In the museum, the garden of officinal herbs is also supported. The National Museum of Education suggests visitors to get acquainted with traditions of education of children, since 16th century. In its collection, pictures and engravings, workbooks of pupils, children's books, school furniture and training materials are collected. The Rouen Museum of Ceramics represents the considerable collection of objects of ceramics showing evolution of production of faience in Rouen. The Museum Lassette, collected by de Tournier, the only collection of art metal wares in the world, including architectural elements, signs, locks and locks, door hammers, hardware goods, jewelry, clothes and footwear accessories, medical tools, ancient cold and firearms. The Air Cornell's House Museum is open in a home of the poet on the street. De la Paix. In a collection, the drawings and etchings relating to his life and the first editions of its works are collected. The Maritime, River and Port Museum of Rouen illustrates the past of port and its masters, the big sailing ships of the Rouen shipowners, sea and river trade, shipbuilding, whaling and also polar expeditions of Jean-Baptiste Charcot. The Museum of Clock Tower acquaints visitors with the history of development of clockworks and in particular, the Big Clock of Rouen. The clockwork of the Big Clock of 1389 and also watch of Church of St. Vivian of the 16th century is presented to expositions. The museum is open in 2006. The Museum of the Rouen Castle, arranged in a tower Joan of Arc, tells about the medieval stronghold constructed in 1204 by the King Philip Augustus on the place of an antique Gallo-Roman amphitheatre. Also far. Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.